Hi, the goal of this video is to go through some domains of inclusion that are often going to be especially relevant if we're thinking about how to make a classroom or workplace environment or other situation more inclusive of neurodivergent individuals. So the domains are sensory processing, timing and structure, group work, or really any kind of team collaboration, belonging, so how to foster a sense of inclusion where people feel welcome discussing their needs. And there's probably several other domains as well that we just haven't included in this video, but that one could think of. Um, so to begin with, sensory processing differences are uh, differences that come from structure of white matter in the brain. So someone might have an increased sensitivity to sensory input like light, sound, touch, etc. And another person with sensory differences might have a decreased sensitivity to the same input. So, for example, someone who is hypersensitive or who has increased sensitivity might be very aware of noises in the background, and a noise that might be relatively quiet for someone with typical sensory processing might sound extremely loud to someone who's hypersensitive in a way that it's extremely distracting for them and hard to work, just as it would be very hard to work for someone who has typical sensory processing if an extremely loud engine was driving by near them as they're working. On the other hand, someone who has hyposensitivity might be unaware of certain noises in the environment and may find it more challenging to pick up on sort of environmental cues that there's a change in activity in a class, for example. Um, so one thing that is often related to sensory processing differences is stimming. So stimming is a repetitive sensory input. You can probably see I'm stimming right now. I really think rocking is wonderful, but there's other types of stimming too. So someone could flap their hands, they could make repetitive noises. They might twirl their hair, play with jewelry repetitively. Really, anything that provides that kind of repetitive sensory input can qualify as stimming. And some of the purposes of this are reducing anxiety, bringing enjoyment and relaxation, and also potentially helping someone be more aware of where their body is in space and even helping them focus. And I think the last point is particularly critical because oftentimes in a classroom setting or a workplace setting, if someone is fidgeting or moving, it can be perceived as if the person isn't focused on the conversation or that their focus is being diverted towards the stimming. Whereas in reality, for many neurodivergent people, stimming is what can actually help us focus on a conversation or a project. So I think an understanding of that can be really beneficial to bring into these environments. Um, Beyond just stimming itself, we can think about how someone's increased sensitivity in some cases might create a greater need for a sensory friendly environment. If we're putting a student who has that increased sensitivity in an environment that's really overwhelming, it's going to be hard for them to focus. And in general, creating a sensory friendly environment is going to benefit quite a variety of students, including those who may have typical sensory processing. It's just a general good practice. So what does a sensory friendly environment look like? It's typically an environment with natural lighting, or at least where there is not as much really bright overhead lighting, where background noise is minimized, or if there is going to be background noise, where students are maybe given advance notice about what they can expect in the environment. They might be able to bring their own noise canceling headphones, for example, if they're told in advance that there will be background noise. Um, Likewise, if there's going to be a video in class that involves a really sudden loud noise or flashing lights, that there's advance notice given for that as well. Um, and in terms of movement, it can be really helpful to make sure that chairs and desks are spaced out. If someone does need to fidget a lot, but they're sitting right next to another person, that can really make it harder for them to feel free to move. They would, naturally worry about bumping into the person next to them. But if the chairs and desks are spaced out, that can help for students who need to move more in place, and also for students who might need to step out of the classroom more frequently. It's going to help them be able to access the exit. So the second domain is structure and consistency. And again, this is something that will benefit most students and is likely going to be especially important for autistic students. Many autistic students really thrive with routine and predictability and knowing what to expect and what's expected of them. Um, and so sudden changes can be particularly distressing if you are someone who really thrives with it and needs that routine and stability that comes with it. And it's worth noting that even last minute changes that might generally be perceived as positive, like providing an extension to the whole class on a homework set, can still be somewhat anxiety inducing for students who struggle with change. And so providing information about this as far in advance as you can is always going to be helpful. Um, One other thing that can be really beneficial when possible is to incorporate as much detail as possible about what students can expect. So you may not be able to guarantee that there will never be uncertainty or never be unpredictability. Maybe if the start time for your class is 8 p.m., you're not necessarily going to be able to start it precisely on the dot at 8 p.m. every time. But what can be helpful is letting students know approximately how much variation there will be. So will your class, for example, virtually always start within 5 minutes of the start time? If the office hours aren't announced yet, that can be a source of uncertainty, but letting the students know that they will be announced by a certain date can mitigate that. Likewise, letting students know that they're always welcome to leave when class ends, even if class goes overtime, that anything that's done, a couple minutes over the class end time will be sent out through email or reviewed at the next class, so they don't have to feel anxiety about the end time of the class. Another area that can sometimes be a little bit stressful or uncertain for students regarding timing is emails. So if you let students know approximately how long they can expect to hear back from you, maybe you'll reply within 2 business days, and if they haven't heard back within 3 business days, they're welcome to follow up. That can be really helpful and eliminate some guesswork for the student too. Um, if you really want to go above and beyond, I don't know that I've ever seen this happen in a university setting, but I think it would be wonderful if it did. You could consider providing pictures of the classroom and maybe even letting students see a picture of the building outside or the path leading up to the classroom and let students know what to expect if they arrive early. Sometimes autistic students find it a little bit more challenging to adjust to new environments. So seeing a picture and kind of a path to get there can help them form an expectation even before arriving at class on the first day. So in addition to providing information about the timing and location of class, it can be helpful to provide a detailed framework for what students can expect from each component of their grade. Um, and this also, I think, offers an opportunity to expand some of these definitions in ways that might be a little bit more inclusive. For example, many classes will have a class participation grade, but this is often kind of a mystery element. It's not really clear how much participation counts as enough, what exactly professors are looking for, and a lot of times students don't really know what that component of their grade is until the very end of the semester or unless they ask. Um, so maybe letting students know that they're welcome to check in on their class participation grade throughout the semester can be helpful. And also potentially broadening it to include not just how much the student talks in class, which could be harder for students who struggle a lot with social anxiety, but also things like asking the professor questions after the lecture, asking or answering questions on Sakai, attending office hours, emailing the professor, maybe potentially emailing the professor with relevant resources or suggestions for supplementary material, or otherwise contributing to the class. It could be through doing a transcript of the class, helping with class recordings, anything that applies to the class and that counts as participation. Um, Another domain of inclusion is presentations and group work, and this can also be quite a stressful um, area for autistic students and neurodivergent students more generally, just because whenever you're involved in group work, that's a lot of social expectations to navigate with, often with many different people in the group. And what can be particularly tricky is if students don't necessarily know when to expect group work, if group work or pairing up with other students in class is kind of sprung on them partway through the lecture. Students might kind of constantly feel on edge and never knowing when that social interaction is going to be expected of them. So if possible, it can be really helpful to let students know in advance which classes will involve group work. You could even just mark these classes with an asterisk on the syllabus if you happen to know from the beginning of term when the classes will be. Um, Another possibility that um, could potentially be useful is providing students with the option of giving a pre-recorded class presentation versus a live presentation. Naturally, if someone's pre-recording their presentation, they're still going to be putting in all the work to make it. They might even be putting in a little bit more work because they might be trying to record it a few different times and use the best take. But it does take out the potential anxiety of having to present in the moment and kind of in front of a large group of people. I think there is a broader question of when a certain amount of stress or pushing students outside their comfort zone can be beneficial. I don't think that alleviating anxiety is necessarily always the correct or optimal solution. But in general, at least being aware of options that may alleviate anxiety and considering on a case-by-case basis with the student whether it's helpful can be beneficial. And certainly always making it clear to students that they're welcome to email you with questions. I don't think that many people realize how many unspoken rules there are in um, in school or in the university or workplace. But they do exist, and examples of them would be, for example, there's often these hidden expectations about how often students can email your professors and TAs. It's generally not considered socially acceptable to email a TA, 20 times a day with questions, but that's usually not explicitly written on the syllabus. It's just understood that everyone knows that. There's also often unspoken rules about how often someone's supposed to talk in class, how often someone's supposed to contribute in class, how someone's supposed to gauge from others' responses that maybe they're contributing too often and it's time for someone else to have a turn. This probably applies a little bit more to the workplace, but sometimes there's optional events that are technically optional, but if you miss all of them, it reflects badly. And so they're not really purely optional in that sense. You're really supposed to go to at least a certain percentage of them. So when possible, being aware of these unspoken rules and either communicating them up front when possible, or just trying to communicate them as early as you realize that someone maybe hasn't been informed of that unspoken rule yet, rather than kind of wondering why the person wasn't able to automatically guess it. And I also just wanted to note that direct communication can be really kind. I think sometimes people worry about direct communication, but it can actually be one of the kindest ways to communicate to someone because it's not ambiguous and there's less a chance of misunderstanding. For example, if someone's asking a lot of questions in class and you just tell them that they're asking a lot of questions, they might just think you're stating a fact because technically that is what you're doing. Whereas maybe you actually mean that they're asking more questions than the class can sustain at the moment, and it's time for someone else to have a turn or time to put a pause on questions temporarily. So whatever it is that you really want to convey, it's probably best to convey that directly. And if possible, I know it might not always be possible to collaboratively brainstorm on everything that comes up, but it can be beneficial to maybe redirect them to someone who could answer their questions or help them come up with a plan for when they can answer questions so they're not just told that what they're doing needs to stop, but also given a way to redirect it to something that does work for everyone. And finally, I think that providing a sense of security and belonging can be really beneficial. A lot of times students may be very nervous to ask professors about accommodations. This can be because they may have had negative experiences in the past. They may have had professors who felt like their accommodation needs were too much hassle or were a burden. Or they might just feel a lot of guilt or anxiety over bothering people or the perception that they might be bothering someone. There's other students who might really benefit from certain accommodations and haven't been able to access a formal diagnosis and might not be sure if a professor will take their request without sort of formal paperwork to back it up. And so for these reasons, it can be really helpful to indicate proactively, even before the term begins, that students don't have to worry about whether or not they're able to ask you about these things. You might not be able to grant every request that they ask, but you're happy to at least discuss it with them. And this is just kind of an example template that you could use for your class if it's helpful. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope some of the information is beneficial and yeah, thank you.